Okay, this is part two of the emotion lecture, and if you recall from part one, we stopped at the influences on emotion. We talked about gender and culture, emotional cognition, and so on. So let's pick up where we left off. We discussed that managing emotions is a bit difficult when we are dealing with all of these influences. So it is typically this part that most often gets us in trouble when emotions begin to take a front seat, so they are in the forefront, and logic and reason is in the back seat or behind us in our everyday interactions, occasionally we fail to manage or express our emotions in the most effective manner. So let's take a look at ways in which that we can express our emotions and how best to handle those stronger, more intense emotions. There are a variety of ways in which people, quote, manage emotions. There are numerous methods, some good, some not so good. But two of the most common ways, and they're common because they're polar opposites, two of the most common ways are suppression and venting. And I'm sure you know just offhand what each one of those are. Suppression being the inhibiting of thoughts, arousal, and outward behavioral displays of emotion. It usually basically stems from the recognition that feeling or thinking and openly communicating certain emotions would be a relationally, socially, or culturally inappropriate move. So you know that if I relay this information, these emotions, that I'm going to get myself in trouble in some way. And that kind of stems back to the stuff we talked about last time with cultural cognition, so the social conventions and the gender and culture and all of those things that influence our emotions. So that's suppression. We suppress the emotion or we hide it. Next is venting, where we allow our emotions to dominate our thoughts and we explosively express them. So we vent out, we push out those emotions with no regards to the impact they may have. So it's kind of like suppression is the hyper awareness of the effects that you have, and venting is the lack of awareness of the effects that you have, or maybe the lack of care about those effects. And while each of these are very common and at times, if actually effectual, they actually work, emotion management strategies that, like these, are at times not necessary to the appropriate management of your emotions. I have to say that this is one of those great lessons that I've kind of learned in life, to be able to prevent certain emotions from occurring in the first place is really a great tool for those that tend to experience strong emotions. Being frank here, I've always been, not so much now, but in the past as I was younger, I've always been a very emotional person. Emotional in every sense. So I was sensitive, but also very passionate, very determined. I could get angry pretty easily. So all of my emotions were very raw. And I had a hard time controlling the methods that I used to deliver those emotions and whether or not I should suppress or vent. Honestly, it was this class, this interpersonal class, and then subsequently my degree in this field that has helped me to manage those emotions and to be more in control of myself. And there are a lot of strategies for doing this, but some, the most common ones, apart from obviously suppression and venting, are also effective depending upon the situation. So let's look at four ways that people typically or commonly prevent emotions. Now remember, this is prevention, not management. You are preventing emotions from ever occurring. Number one common way to do this is encounter avoidance. So basically staying away from people, places, or activities that you know are going to provoke your emotions and you don't want to experience those emotions. So for example, if I know that my Aunt Betsy seems to know how to push my buttons better than anyone I know, my goal would be to try to avoid her at all costs. Or if I know that when I attend live sports games, I tend to yell and scream the entire time, and I might choose either not to watch the game at all or to watch it at home by myself where the emotion is less likely to fester if there's no one around. So, and when I say yell and scream, cheer is not what I'm talking about. I mean throwing things, cussing, being intense if you know you don't want to do that. because you don't want to relay those emotions, then you may avoid that encounter altogether. So encounter avoidance is one. Another one is encounter structuring. So you intentionally avoid specific topics that you know will provoke unwanted emotion during the encounters with others. So for example, if I know that when my coworker begins to talk politics with me, I choose to change the subject with her if it comes up, because I know that politics is a hot button issue for me, and she and I can't do a conversation on that subject. Another example would be if I know that I tend to get very sad when people talk about my friend that passed away, I intentionally avoid talking about her until I can handle my emotions better. So I structure my emotional occurrences. I make sure that only certain topics are permitted, and I choose to actively steer clear or avoid topics that make things hard. Number three, this third common way that people prevent emotions, is attention focus. So you intentionally devote your attention only to the aspects of an event or an encounter that you know will not provoke an undesired emotion. So for example, if I notice that I tend to get really annoyed at work meetings when they have gone over an hour, however, I usually like the food they bring to the meetings, I will focus on the food. Maybe contemplate how this item or that item could be made at home. So I focus on the things that don't annoy me. Or number two, if I really hate working out, I might try to pump myself up by thinking about all the benefits I will receive from that workout. Or I might focus on, if you've ever been to a gym, you know oftentimes there's television screens that have shows on, and I might focus on that positive. I get to watch my show, and not focus on the pain or the tiredness from the workout. So that's attention focus. You zoom your focus in on the positives so that you can avoid or prevent the negative emotions. And then number four, finally, is deactivation, which is systematically desensitizing yourself to an emotional experience. So you actually choose to desensitize yourself. So for example, if I tend to feel unappreciated by my spouse at home, I might try to imagine what his life is like on a daily basis in an attempt to, quote, put myself in his shoes and deactivate that feeling, that unappreciated feeling, that particular emotion. And that's actually a decently positive way to do that, because oftentimes we make assumptions and we choose to feel a certain way, whether we realize we're choosing it or not. We choose to feel a certain way without thinking about it clearly. And that's what these do. Now, yes, some of these can be used ineffectually, and they can cause you problems. If you avoid your emotions all the time, yes, they could possibly build up. But there are absolutely appropriate ways and reasons why you might choose these methods of prevention, and are absolutely okay in certain circumstances. You just have to think about what works for you and use strategies, one of the four strategies, in the appropriate situation. Okay? Next section that we're going to look at, we're going to examine some of the most common emotional challenges and some of the ways that people can address those challenges. So we've got a table here that looks at, first, what the emotional challenge is, second, what we do in that challenge and why we do it, and then third, what should we do about it. So let's look at the first one emotional challenge. We don't often think of this as an emotional challenge, but it is, and that's online communication. So what do we do, and why is it an emotional challenge? Asynchronicity. Asynchronicity basically is when the interaction is delayed or it's not in real time. So that would be a Facebook post that you respond to an hour later or even 10 minutes later. It's not a chat room or an instant message text message like you might do with two iPhones. It's not the same. You know that there's a potential for delay. So we know that there will be a response to our message, but we choose when and if we want to view those messages. Also, in online communication, there's this sense of invisibility. So without a physical context, we feel as if we're, quote, not there. So we have this sense or feeling of invisibility. When we speak face-to-face, we react to others' feedback. So they say things or they react a certain way, even hold silence, and we react to that. So when we see negative feedback to what we say, we automatically adjust to avoid our negative consequences. In online communication, because of that invisibility, we aren't able to do that. So it's a challenge to manage emotions effectively because we tend to see ourselves as invisible and can be a little bit more intense online than we should be. And also the asynchronicity. We see it, but we can't respond to a heated reaction right away. So what should you do? Recognize the permanency of online communication. Understand that nonverbals are not clearly present in an online environment like they are in a face-to-face environment. It is impossible to be 100% clear in most instances of communication unless you are absolutely certain what those nuances are for that individual person. You're super close to them, and you know that a delayed response in a text message does not mean they're mad at you. I mean, there's all these things that perpetuate assumptions because of the asynchronicity. And in other cases would be the invisibility. We react strongly, and we can say things that might come out wrong because that nonverbal's not there. So remember that nonverbals don't exist, and be as clear-cut as you can possibly be. Explain how you feel. Don't use short responses. Be very detailed, especially if it's an issue that could cause something a little bit more hot-buttoned. And watch your language. Watch how you respond to that other person, especially if you care about them, because you don't want to start something that is misconstrued or causes additional harm. Next emotional challenge is anger. We wrongly assume that we can easily suppress or openly express anger, and the damage will be minimal. We often think, well, I should have the right to tell you how I feel. I have the right to express how I feel and all this anger and all this frustration. Or opposite, I can't tell you how I feel. I can't express this anger because if I do, it's going to cause all these problems. The most common management strategy for anger often is suppression, and we take it to an extreme. And sometimes that good old saying that if you hold it in, it's going to explode is true, and other times it just makes you sick and it ruins your relationships. It may never explode, but it's going to fester and it's going to make you ill. So occasionally it's okay to suppress anger, but constant suppression is going to lead to physical and mental issues, since you're putting yourself in pretty much a near constant state of arousal and negative thinking. I mean, imagine when you feel stressed. You've got a lot going on at school, and you can feel the blood pressure rise, and you get headaches and those kinds of things. The stress level's really high. You're not sleeping well and so on. If you hold in anger, if you suppress that anger, which anger does give you those same exact feelings that stress does, if you hold it in over and over and over again, well, there's a very good chance that it is going to make you physically or mentally ill because of that constant state of arousal, that constant high levels of blood pressure, the constant intensity of your veins and your clenched fists and so on. It's going to add to those negative reactions. Now, venting can be a common choice as well. Some people do typically vent more than they suppress. It depends on personality. However, studies have shown that the more someone vents about their anger, the angrier they get. My husband actually found this out for himself. He realized that the more he literally spoke the words about his anger, if he continued down a path of conversation, he just got more and more angry. And so he and I have worked out that when he's upset about something and he vents it, I know to step back and let him cool off until that extra expression of anger won't build on itself. So you have to know to work with a certain individual. And typically when someone vents really hard about feelings of heavy anger, you continuing that conversation will not aid you in any way. So you have to give them a moment to calm down. Now, again, some of the other things that you can do is to have encounter avoidance if it works. You don't want to have encounter avoidance with your spouse every day. You may be able to choose this with the guy that flipped you off while they're driving down the highway. You know, you don't have to introduce yourself to every bad situation. You can also structure conversations if that works with a professor that you disagree with that makes you frustrated, or a coworker, or so on. You can also do reappraisal. And when that's active, what that is actively changing what you think about the meaning of the emotional situation. So you initially go into a situation and you think that that person's out to get you, or they're just a jerk. You know, you're using those external attributions. But if you refocus and really take the time to sit down and think about that person, well, then maybe you can revamp this to make it a better situation. Another strategy is to use the Jefferson strategy, and that's a very simple, doesn't always work, but in some cases can make a huge difference, where you count to 10 or 100, I would say, before you actually speak about a topic. So you don't let your mouth explode. I think this is also good with emails. You walk away for at least 10 minutes. And emails, Facebook pages, I mean all of those things. But you instead of responding to a post, you walk away for at least 10 minutes, if not longer, and then come back to it so you don't have a knee-jerk reaction. The next one is passion, which is basically a combination of a lot of primary emotions. When you feel passion, you're often feeling surprise, joy, and excitement, and a bunch of other things all mixed together. That's why oftentimes people say that you lose passion in a relationship because you lose that surprise. And so once you become familiar with a person, the surprise is gone, and therefore the passion deteriorates. That's not a great way to look at things, but it is something that people constantly think about. So since passion does include surprise, the longer you know someone, the less passion you will experience towards that person on a daily basis, and that can be a challenge. Now, passion cannot be recreated. You can't set up a surprise and induce passion by, doing a romantic dinner or a weekend together. Both actually have to be surprised. Both people need to be surprised. Now, you can induce a fun experience, but you're not going to induce that initial feeling of passion. So instead, the goal is to then seek happy and long-term relationships and good experiences. There's a study that was done recently that basically came to the conclusion that you can accurately predict divorce rates based on the number of positive experiences a person has with their spouse compared to the number of negative experiences. So if the positive experiences in a single given day far outweigh the negatives, they won't get divorced. And this is before these people even have their first anniversary. You can interview them and then 20 years later go back to find out whether they're divorced or not and know for sure that you can predict that pretty well by judging how many positive experiences versus negative experiences that person has with that relationship. So passion is one of those. And then finally, grief. In grief, it's extremely difficult because people react differently to grief. Nothing at all, or offer messages that are not literally or really supportive communication is something that happens often. You say things like, "Man, that sucks, I'm sorry," or "I feel so bad for you," or "I'm so sorry for your loss," and it's not real supportive information. It doesn't really show how much you care about that individual person, and it's hard because we don't know. We don't know how to react to grief in many circumstances. You want to be as engaged in supportive communication as you possibly can. So, for example, instead of saying to a friend who lost their dad or their brother, you wouldn't say, "I'm so sorry for your loss," or something like that, very generic. You can say, "I am very sorry for your loss. Jim was a really great guy." You want to use their name. You want to say, "Karen was an inspiration to me," or "Becky really lightened my day." You want to use words. You want to use their name like that so that they feel that personal connection. Next one, another way to do it would be to focus on that person and say, "Remember that I love you, and please tell me if I can do anything." And then offer suggestions. "Can I bring you dinner tonight?" And be there for them, ready to do it right then and there. And another one, "Let me know if you need someone to just listen." And don't leave it there. Don't just say, "Okay, if you need me to talk, then we'll talk." Actively seek them out and offer those condolences wholeheartedly. So don't use strategic or backwards information. Don't use things that you don't believe in. Be personal and offer support to that person that you are willing to give. And be very specific about the support that you're offering. All right, so this was the second half of the emotional lecture, and hopefully you saw not only in the past what some of those influences are, but some of the struggles that we have and methods of delivering or managing our emotions. See you next lecture.